Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Nelson. I am a technical evangelist at Pure Storage, and I am here to talk about using and managing Microsoft Azure for the VMware admin. Now, I started giving this presentation back, believe it or not, back in 2017, and it's gone through a bunch of revisions and things like that, but the basics really haven't changed. So I'm going to walk you through actually, what you should be looking for, different services that you can use inside of Azure if you're not familiar with it. And there probably aren't some folks that are, if you're kind of sitting in an area where you're, are just doing VMware admin, you need exposure into those other things. So why do you need to know this? Because it's really about expanding your horizons, if you will. Not only that, but somebody might come along and say, hey, we need you to take care of this for us. We need to move these VMs into Azure, or we need this service, okay? We've subscribed to a service up in Azure, and it deals with virtualization, and that's in your job title, so we want you to do it. A lot of different reasons for it. So, anybody knows a lot about dolphins? You're kind of like, why is he showing dolphins on the screen? Well, there's a good reason, because I didn't know if you knew this, but it's fascinating. Dolphins actually only sleep. They have two hemispheres in their brain. Only one hemisphere sleeps at a time. So a dolphin is always awake, okay? One hemisphere is sleeping, the other one is awake. Now, what that leads to is that a dolphin communicates by clicks, okay, and sonar. Now, what they say is that they can do clicks and sonar at the same time. One hemisphere is doing clicks, the other one is doing sonar. They're actually carrying on two different conversations at the same time. That is incredible. Now think as human beings if we could do that. A lot of us can't even keep one conversation going at the same time, right? So as administrators, take a look at what you do today. If that's what you do as a storage administrator, a VMware administrator, you've got more people that want to actually have you do multiple things at the same time. It's that whole multitasking thing, right? But multitasking, you can, context switch, context switch, context switch, and it gets really confusing. And you got to do that when you're actually looking at public cloud and what you've been doing on-prem for so many years. So if you take a look at Azure as it is, I don't know if you're familiar with it. So if Azure right now has about 60 different regions, okay? Over 200 plus data centers located throughout the world. So it's a big, bad, beautiful world of Azure, right? AWS is still the leader. They still have a little bit more, but Microsoft's right there. So if you're taking a look at it from a standpoint of where can I put the stuff that I'm working on, you've got a lot of possibilities. Cloud models. Now, when you take a look at cloud models, it's because you want to take a look at what you're actually responsible for. A lot of folks will say, hey, I don't have to do this. Microsoft's going to take care of that. All right? I don't want Microsoft to take care of this. I want to take care of that. Okay? But it's clearly defined what the cloud models are, what you're responsible for, and what Microsoft is responsible for. Now, if you take a look at what the new AVS service does, that kind of skews it a little bit, okay? So Microsoft and VMware have kind of changed the rules a little bit around the cloud model in that pretext of AVS, but it's not really that much. There's another presentation that you can stop at the VMware booth and ask them about it, but it really follows this line. Now, if you find this kind of confusing, you're kind of like, yeah, I'm not really sure where it fits. Let's take a look at it from a pizza perspective. All right? So when you look at it from a pizza perspective, these are all the things that you're responsible for with the soda and the table and the electric, the gas, the oven, and this is what the actual pizza place is responsible for. The gas, the oven, the fire, the pizza dough, the tomato sauce, the toppings, okay? If it's delivered or it's dined out, if it's made at home or it's take and bake. So think of it that way. There are certain things that you are responsible for and other things that they are responsible for. And there it goes. So the core of Microsoft Azure has to do when you're looking at accounts. Now, we're all familiar with vCenter, right? vCenter, you have the vCenter, you have a data center, you have your clusters, you have your resource pools, you have folders, you have all that kind of stuff in an organizational standpoint. Inside of Azure, you're looking at it from an Azure tenant. Okay, it starts out as an Azure tenant or account. Now, you can get this free account for yourself, or maybe your organization already has an account that you work under. All right? From there, we take a look at it from an actual subscription. An Azure account can have multiple subscriptions. You may just be using one subscription that your organization has like tens or hundreds of. Okay, and that's just how Azure, Microsoft gets paid, basically. Either you're going to pay by, credit card, or it's pay as you go, or, however it's worked out with your company. From there, we start looking into what we call the directory. Now, the directory is just like, think of it, everybody know what Active Directory is, right? I mean, you should by now. And what we've done up in Azure is something called Azure Active Directory, AAD. You'll hear that referenced a lot. Same thing in here. A directory is always inside of a subscription, which is always inside of a tenant. So from a directory standpoint, that contains all of your objects. Inside of that directory, like I said, all the objects, but you also have something called resource groups, or RGs. Resource groups contain all of those objects, but it puts it in a logical format, a logical area. So you think, hey, I need my VMs for my database folks to be inside of this RG. And I've named it Database RG. Okay, so logically, you can organize these objects. Now, there are restrictions on the number of objects and things like that. I'm not going to get into that because they haven't given me enough time. But you need to, if you go and investigate this, you'll find out that there are certain things you can put in there, there's certain things you can't put in there, and there's a limit on the number of things. Now you can see it fill in. The number of things would be like the VMs, maybe some SQL databases. You're looking at NSG, which is network security groups, things like that, even networking. So let's take a look at how you get into Azure. How many folks actually use Azure today? All right, so you're probably getting in one way, I'll bet. Maybe two. Okay, I didn't know if you knew this, but there are like a bunch of different ways you can get in. Almost a dozen if you want to count them all. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of them. First, you're going to go into Azure, into a browser, and you can see, you can just click on and get a free subscription, right? That'll get you in. You can take a look at it. You get $100 a month, I think it is, something like that. But the obvious place to start is called the portal. So the Azure portal is the UI. You can see right here, I'm looking around. This is your home page. You can see all the options that are available to you down here, but this is just a sampling. It's not all of them, okay? You actually can go to like all services and you can see more services that are available to you. Literally, there's over almost now like 6,000 services that are available to you inside of Azure. Okay, once you get in, there's the subscriptions I was talking about. You can take a look at those. You can move things around. So this is kind of like your little flyout area. You can move things around and put them in order however you want. We click on subscriptions. This is where you take a look at actual subscription that you have and what the capabilities are, how they're built, so on and so forth. We take a look at this again. We're going to drop down and we're going to look at the dashboard. Now, dashboards you can create. Dashboards can be pre-made. They can be shared amongst people. You can add a bunch of widgets. You can, put graphs, make it look all pretty, all that kind of fun stuff. But that's the reason of having dashboards. From here, we'll take a look at the all services. This is where every service that you have available to you, and even ones that you don't, that you can pay for, you can search. So here I'm just searching for VM. Right there, VMware vCenters. You can actually go in and add vCenters to Azure. There's free services, right? So free services would be great for you to try it out. If you haven't used Azure, you can go ahead and spin up some free VMs. The Azure VMware solution, okay, if you haven't looked at that, the AVS solution is really cool. From there, yeah, see, I clicked that little star there, it moved it into here, which is our favorites, right? So from here, I'm actually going to go up. Now I'm going to use something called Cloud Shell. If you've ever heard of Cloud Shell is actually a CLI that allows you to access Azure resources. I'm accessing it right from the portal. If you notice, there was a little icon on the upper there. I clicked it, it opens up another window, and it starts a PowerShell session. Inside of this PowerShell session are over 50 applications that are preloaded for you. That include things like PowerShell, AZ, CLI. It includes things like Node.js, MySQL command line, all kinds of things. Here it's actually, I'm right here, I'm doing like a get process. So this is running inside of a Linux container, all right? And the reason why it's running inside of a Linux container is because you can switch it between PowerShell and Bash. So if you're a Linux person, you were raised on Linux and you know Bash better than PowerShell, you can switch it right over to Bash and use that as well. It even has a built-in editor that looks like VS Code a little bit. Not much, but it does kind of a little bit. you know, that you can actually edit files. But you're like, man, that's so small, right? Well, you can actually go, and then watch I put it here, is shell.azure.com. You go to shell.azure.com, it opens up a full window for Cloud Shell. All right, so you have the full capability of the window where you can execute everything just right from there. And you can see here, I've actually got a shell. Now I can go ahead and do whatever I need to do, but it's a lot clearer. It still has the same options that are available there, okay, including the editor, which is a lot bigger now, so you can go in and edit files as you see fit. And then I'm going to come back over here eventually, and I'm going to switch to bash. So it's just as simple as that. It says, hey, you sure you want to switch to bash? Go ahead. We'll switch over to a bash prompt. Now, if you're a Linux person, you're like, cool, I know exactly what I'm doing here, right? And you run it, and you can see it's a full Linux system. So those are how many ways so far? 1, 2, maybe 3. Okay, maybe 4, because you got bash in there as well. Bash, PowerShell, right? All right. You also have the ability to do it inside of VS Code. VS Code, if you use that, you actually have an extension called, the first one is Azure Account. So if you connect to Azure Account inside of VS Code, you load that extension, and then you get this little icon that's right down here. You got a whole bunch of Azure stuff, by the way, extension-wise you can add. But you get this little icon down here. I'm sorry if you can't see it over there. And then once you get there, it shows you the API management resources, and it wants you to sign into Azure. So you're gonna log into Azure so it can see those resources, what I'm doing here. So I close the browser page, I go back into VS Code, I bring the window back up here, and as you can see, it's showing my resources that are available, all right, and it's showing my workspaces. So in Azure Labs, you can see all the services that I have available to me, okay, just like you would see in the portal, but you're seeing it inside of VS Code, all right, so it makes it a lot easier. If you're doing scripts or whatever, you can do it right inside of here and communicate directly with Azure. From this standpoint, I'm actually going to look at, static web apps. The workspaces, this is where you actually look at storage accounts. Now, what's cool is you can run an emulator right here. So you don't even have to use the storage inside of Azure. You just want to emulate the storage so you can find out how much it's going to cost. It has a built-in blob emulator, a built-in storage emulator that you can use to try it out. This right here, the API, I'm getting the errors because I'm not connected with a person that has API credentials. But you can do API management there as well. Here's where I'm actually looking at the storage account. This is my Cloud Shell account. I'm going in and I'm looking at what is actually using storage. So I go to File Shares. There's my Cloud Shell, okay? And I look at Cloud Console. This is the actual IMG file, the image file of that Cloud Console that you saw me working in. It's just a Linux container. That's all it is. Go ahead and click, you can create a virtual machine right inside of VS Code. I just click virtual machine. It's going to ask me, what is the name you want to call that? I'm just going to call it test VM. And then it wants to enter a passphrase for connection. Obviously, because in SSH it wants a passphrase. You can switch it over to certificates, but it wants to do this first. And they must match. And then you pick a region to put it into. Now, notice it didn't tell me what kind of OS to use. And the reason is because this is going by default. By default, believe it or not, Microsoft will put Ubuntu Linux before they'll put a Windows OS. All right? So this automatically will install a Ubuntu Linux machine. One of the reasons for that is licensing. Okay? Ubuntu doesn't cost anything to license, but Microsoft, server or workstation, that costs a license. So you can see here I have no virtual machines right now. The Azure VMware solution, you can actually create those machines. This is right here. Let me pop back into, excuse me. Where am I going here? I should be going into, notifications. It'll tell you that it's actually building something when it gets to it. I should be going back to VS Code. Take a look. There we go. It's creating the virtual machine test VM. It's creating the network. It gives you the entire status right down here. Now, obviously, you can see I sped it up because it takes a little bit to do that. And eventually here you'll see the full output. Okay, it created the virtual machine. It succeeded, right? And it'll actually say right there, do you want to view the output? This tells you everything that it did, and then it actually tells you, okay, what the SSH config is so you can add your certificate and things like that. It's very helpful information. So once it's actually created, I go back into the portal and I can see that VM, and then I can work with that VM from this standpoint. Here I'll just do a refresh and you'll see my test VM there now. And you can see that the test VM is up and running, and it gives you all the information about it, and you can go ahead and you can do that. Now, another way to access a mobile app, believe it or not. Android and iOS, you can access your entire Azure inventory inside of a mobile app, and you can see all the activity, the metrics that are going on, your networking, all that kind of fun stuff. As you can see, I'm scrolling through a lot of the metrics. This is all happening on a phone. Now, obviously, at an iPad and stuff, it would look a lot better, right? Especially when you come up and you start taking a look at, like, you know, even the rules that you're looking at. You start looking at networking statistics and things like that. That's all really cool stuff. I mean, all in the palm of your hand in case you get on call. You got to look up a machine. It's right there. From here, you can take a look at disks. You can look at alerts. You can do all that kind of fun stuff. Now, what's cool is, look what's back. Cloud Shell. You can run Cloud Shell on iOS. Look at that, it's bringing up a shell. And this is running on iOS. So I can actually sit there in my little tiny screen and I can go like this and try and, you know, type all the things I want to do inside of Cloud Shell. Even virtual keyboard. From here I'm going to do, you know, get process. Once I actually click, there we go. And it gives me the same output. All right? Just like we could do through the web interface. So I don't know how many that is now. We're up to maybe 6 or 7, maybe coming up here. All right, so a little bit more I want to talk about on Cloud Shell. And there's something called Azure CLI. So Cloud Shell was one of them. Azure CLI is the actual de facto default that Microsoft uses to communicate with what they call the Graph API. The Graph API governs all of Azure. Okay? Every object that you can see in Azure is governed by the Graph API. Now, you can use Azure CLI to actually do more things than you can do inside of the portal. Why is that? Because an API is actually progressed faster than a UI. It takes a while to put a button in a UI. It takes a while to figure out where that widget's going to go, where it's going to sit, where it's going to move, and things like that. So using command line tools is a lot faster, okay, and a lot quicker to results. So we take a look at this. I'm clicking, there we go. So we take a look at, we're going to actually install modules. I'm setting a Cloud Shell, and I want to install a module. What if you want to use VMware Power CLI? You can install Power CLI inside of your Cloud Shell. You have a 5 gig image. That 5 gig image can hold a lot. And as you can see here, I'm installing the entire Power CLI, which is a big package, by the way. I'm installing the entire thing inside of Cloud Shell. So every time I go into Cloud Shell, I will have the access to Power CLI, which is really advantageous for, you know, doing work with the VMware VMs. So right here, I can show you that it actually did install just by doing a connect VI server to show you that it actually is a commandlet that's available there. And then we also have the VR server, the VMC, VCS. And then you get the full output, right? You get the whole yellow, I don't know what they call it, the banner, if you will. I list the modules out, but then you get the whole banner thing from VMware saying, welcome to Power CLI, you got to do this, do that, that type of thing. So that's how you would actually install that inside. Now, Cloud Shell is actually downloadable as a container. So if you wanted to, you could actually download that container and run Cloud Shell locally. So what's the advantageous of this? Dark sites, right? Anything that would have a hard time connecting to the internet, anything that would, you know, you want to talk CLI, you can actually download it as a Docker container, run it on a local laptop. It's a very small footprint, and you can run all your commands directly from there. Here you can actually see the problem is, look how big that sucker is. The container is a lot bigger. Why? Because if you look at it from an Azure point of view, Azure spins it up as a container, right? Inside of a Kubernetes cluster. The cluster is hosting other source resources inside of it. And that container that you're going to download is just a single container. It has to have all of the resources in a single container. All right, so that's why it's so much bigger than what you would actually use if you're using the cloud, Cloud Shell in the cloud. This actually tells you how to install the Azure PowerShell commandlets. Azure has its own PowerShell commandlets along with Azure CLI. That's all available on Microsoft Learn. I'm not sure why I'm going through this. Okay. Using Postman. So if anybody wants to talk direct APIs to Azure, you can do that as well using API clients such as Postman. A lot of folks are kind of, they don't like to do that, but then there are some folks that want to do a lot of automation and a lot of trigger automations and things like that. Then you would talk directly to the Graph API via third-party tools, such as that. It also has the Graph Explorer. So if you want to try something out in Graph, you can actually go to an Explorer interface, and it's like think of it as like a playground, as a sandbox. You can actually test out API calls to Azure. So you can run, it even gives you examples, okay? But you can run direct API calls and get results. Okay? So networking. Networking is really important, right? So from a networking standpoint, you have something called virtual networks. We're going to go down, and you can see right here under virtual networks. Click there. When you create a virtual network, there's a couple different kinds, right? You have an internal network that actually talks machine to machine. You also have networks that can talk on-prem up into Azure, which are sometimes VPNs or express routes. But that's all defined inside of the virtual networks portion of Azure. Here you can take a look at Azure Firewall, private endpoints, all that other kind of stuff. But when you're dealing with networks, you have to know how to actually connect it back to on-prem if you're going to be managing like vCenter or anything like that. It has to be a connection. It has to be a point-to-point connection via VPN or express route, something like that. You can actually get visualizations of your virtual networks when you're working in them. Take a look at your address space, your subnets, all that kind of stuff. It really kind of helps you out understand logically how things are connected. Just like you can do in vCenter today. You take a look at the way that things are logically connected via subnets and things like that. You can do the same thing in Azure. Actually, I think Azure is actually a little bit better at visualizing the whole thing than what VMware does. You can even assign your own DNS servers, which is kind of important when you're working with services that require specialized DNS. You don't have to use Azure's DNS. Now, peering would allow you to take one virtual network and peer it to another. So those two virtual networks can share resources. They can talk to each other. Otherwise, by default, networks can't see each other. All right, so when you set up a VM on a virtual network here and a VM on a virtual network here, they can't talk to each other. Not unless you specifically tell them that they're able to do that. One way you do that is by peering those networks together. And this is where I get into the express route circuits. If you don't, I don't know if you know if your company has an express route or not. Maybe you would, but usually that's handled on the networking side, and it's just a direct connection right into Azure Data Center. It's really kind of cool because you have like really low latency and stuff like that. And then you have your VPN connections, which you can set up. You can set it up to your home if you like. I have a VPN, point-to-point VPN connection out of my home directly into Azure. And that just makes it one big network for me, and I can do whatever I need to do up there. Think about this from the standpoint of VMware. You can do the same thing. If you had VMware running, machines running up in there, you had a point-to-point VPN, vCenter would be able to see that VM. Storage. Take a look at storage. Storage has a whole bunch of different things that have to do with, different tiers, hot, cold, really hot. All kinds of things, but basically you're dealing with different kinds of storage, blob storage, file storage, and you're not dealing with data stores, okay? So the logic of a data store really kind of goes out the window with Azure. Azure's looking at it more from a standpoint of just being like a file system, okay? Or being a mass storage device that you can attach to a VM or to a service. All right, it doesn't really care, it doesn't want you to care about the back end and how it's all engineered and things like that. It just wants you to be able to point and click and use things efficiently. You can see all the metrics and things like that, all about your storage. Take a look at the capabilities. You can actually do crazy things like create static websites on your storage and do lifecycle management, have it actually go through and you know, change to different types. And then you can actually open an Explorer. So if you have storage, you can click on Open an Explorer and it opens it up in Explorer. You can actually see your storage like in an Explorer view, which is really kind of cool if you're like moving files around and stuff. And then this opens up Storage Explorer, which is an add-on which allows you to visualize all the storage that's available to you. New version, blah, blah, blah. And eventually this will come up and show you, there we go. You can see all of the storage, all your disks. If you have any Cosmos DB, Data Lake, all that kind of fun stuff. All right, so monitoring. Real quick, I have only about a minute left. I'm gonna go through this. Azure Monitor and Advisor will actually go through and allow you to monitor and advise you on things that you need to do inside of Azure. Now, is this important to you? It very well could be, because you may have to control costs. You may be responsible for saying, hey, we need to control the costs around what's being done in Azure. Right? So Azure Monitor is really kind of cool. It gives you all this information about alerting, just like, you know, anything else. Anything goes wrong, you can be alerted on it. You know, you're able to do change analysis, what actually happened, who changed it, when they changed it, and all that, which is really cool. Consumption. Extra point, extra credit. What movie is this from? Okay, Christmas Vacation. All right, cost management and budgeting. That's really kind of important, right? Because how much money are you going to spend? How much money is before you spend, and your boss gets an invoice from Microsoft and he's like, whoa, what's this all about? You really have to understand cost, okay? It has a full cost management solution for you. So Microsoft and VMware, this is the last slide. As you can see, keep your friends close, keep your enemies even closer. Anybody know what that's from? Mad Magazine, all right, Spy versus Spy. The two resources they have, Azure Arc for VMware vCenter and VMs, and the Azure VMware Services, which is really cool. I advise you to check it out. It works really sweet. And that is it for me. Thank you very much.